You can see that too in the way I think that the law has struggled to keep up with the technological development. I appreciate the idea of communal knowledge and oral tradition and like person to person.
I've just been thinking about like what would it look like to go back to a knitting culture that was more based on sharing and communal bettering, I guess. And is it possible maybe to build that within our own small communities? Said I'm all about it. Yeah, I'm all about it. Said I'm all about it. Yeah, 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 yeah. Said I'm all about it. Yeah, I'm all about it. Said I'm all about it. Yeah, 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 yeah. Hello, and welcome to Two Women Yelling About Knitting, a show that is not about what we're buying or what we're making, but instead asks questions like, is it possible for one knitting designer to copy another designer's work if both designers are copying a sweater from Cezanne? This is a space where we look up from our works in progress and acquisitions and talk about what we see in the wider world of knitting, its political, social, and historical context. But don't worry, it'll be fun. I'm Anjali, and I'm a knitter in Denver, Colorado.
I'm Allison, and I'm a knitter living outside of Washington, D.C. We're friends who share a love of knitting as well as an interest in a lot of sticky topics that relate to knitting, things like politics, mental health, intellectual property, and more. We are recording another 6-episode season with a new episode and a new topic every 3 weeks. If you want to join us on this journey, hit the subscribe button to follow along.
So Allison, what are we yelling about today?
Today, we're going to yell about knitting and intellectual property. Which has a very long and interesting history and is certainly something that you and I have both seen a lot of in the knitting sphere.
Yeah, it feels like every week there's a new accusation of somebody copying somebody else.
So we wanted to look at what the kind of the two sides of the coin being the actual legal circumstances of knitting and intellectual property, as well as the social/ethical circumstances of knitting and intellectual property. What is allowed by law and what is not, and also how the knitting world reacts to things and how that perhaps affects what people do or don't do, even if something is not technically illegal. That being said, we want to preface this episode by saying neither one of us is a lawyer. And so this is not legal advice. This is just two people curious and interested in yelling about something. And as with much of our work, we don't want to make these episodes 3 hours long. We also acknowledge our own limited scope of understanding. And so a lot of what we talk about today will focus specifically on U.S. law. So this may or may not apply to other countries.
It's not two lawyers yelling about knitting.
No, not two lawyers yelling about anything ever. So, Anjali, have you ever decided not to buy a pattern because you thought you could figure it out for yourself?
Yes. I thought no at first because, as you know, I basically always want my knitting to feel like that emoji of the woman getting her head massaged. But for Christmas, I made my younger son a tube scarf, like a keyhole tube scarf, so he could put the end of the scarf through the hole. And looked around and realized like I can just do this myself. Didn't really love the look of the things that I found, so kind of took a look at some specs on patterns on Ravelry and then made my own, and it came out great, and just made up my own sort of stripe pattern, and it was great. I did not then go on to sell said pattern, but I did keep it for myself, and he loves the scarf. How about you, Allison? Have you ever?
For myself, the specific example I'm thinking of is the pressed flowers motif by Amy Christoffers. I have superimposed that onto the kind of kerchief style cowl construction. And so I put that motif onto that construction and did do like a whole chart for it. But like, would that be considered its own pattern? I think it would be. But again, I just did it for myself. I didn't try to sell it or anything like that. So I think that's probably the closest I've come to to not buying a pattern. To just
So we're safe.
Putting two
we're
together.
Not gonna
yes.
Get,
we're neither, we've neither broken the law nor are we going to be shamed, which are the two options that we're kind of talking about today.
The two possible consequences
to doing such a thing.
It's just starting out. What we were wondering is, what does copyright law actually cover? You know, there's all these accusations flying, but like in the legal system, again, we're kind of focused on the US, what is covered? So there are treaties between countries that mean that if something is copyright protected in one country, under that country's laws, it is automatically protected under other countries under the same laws from the original country. In the US, what is protected is creative expression, but not ideas, processes, or systems.
Patents and copyrights are two different things, and patents do apply to things like systems or machines or techniques, but that is not something that is applicable to knitting. So it is something that can be legally protected, but not in the knitting space.
Yes, and it's
other than knitting machines.
Right. Patents, I think it seems like the sort of bar you have to clear to show that like this thing is very unique and different from what has come before is a bit higher than for, say, a copyright. And also the process is a lot longer, so it doesn't seem like it would be very practical a lot of times for things related to fashion and garments, because those trends and things move so quickly. So knitting patterns are interesting because they encompass both creative expression in the written instructions, in the photos of the pattern, in the charts that maybe are created to illustrate the pattern, the schematics. All of those are creative expression. And they also include technical instructions. And they encompass an idea, right? Like the actual idea of the garment. So there's things within a knitting pattern that are covered and not covered.
An analogy that many people make that I thought of in particular, given Anjali's background, is that of recipes. And so, and I think that that's an interesting way, a parallel way to think about it, especially maybe for those viewers / listeners who are not as into knitting. There are a lot of parallels to how recipes are protected or not protected. So Anjali, you also happen to know about that. Could you explain how that lines up in terms of what is copyrighted, what is not?
I used to be a recipe writer when I was working as a contributing editor for the website The Kitchen. So a lot of people are surprised to know what is and is not able to be copyrighted in a recipe. The ingredient list cannot be copyrighted. So someone could have a recipe with the exact same ingredient list that you had in your recipe that you published on your blog, and you can't take them to court for having the exact same ingredients as you, even if it was some sort of recipe that was very specific. The instructions, especially if there's something expressive, are protected. So if the instructions are extremely simple, it is unlikely that those would be protected. If it's something like mix together olive oil and vinegar, like that you can't copyright those instructions. So, but if you write maybe more unique or flowery language in your recipes, that is considered creative expression, and then that could be copyrighted.
If someone has simple instructions in their recipe, could you literally just copy and paste someone else's recipe and put it on your own thing and claim it for your own? Like, does there need to be any difference?
So if it's a simple recipe, meaning the instructions are written in a simple and straightforward way, you could just literally copy and paste the ingredients and the instructions and publish them on your own work. And actually, I was thinking about it, and that is, I don't know if you were a reader of many cooking blogs in the early mid aughts, but for example, the very, very popular cooking blog Orangette, she would make recipes from like Bon Appetit magazine and then publish the recipe that she had made that had been written and developed by another entity, and then kind of like write her own thoughts around it. And that was an extremely popular method of having a food blog at that time.
Yeah, that does sound familiar.
Yeah, it wasn't people developing things from scratch. It was people making recipes from other bigger, more established entities and then writing about their thoughts on them, kind of like reviewing. So,
which is,
yeah,
that was protected. Allowed. That was allowed.
That was allowed.
Right.
She didn't steal like the head notes from the recipes. Those are typically copyright protected. She took her own photos. But the actual recipe itself, and I don't know if sometimes she would rewrite it, because honestly, like being in the food writing space at that time, it feels weird to just wholesale copy and paste someone's recipe. So I think often they might tweak something in the instructions.
I used 1.5 teaspoons.
Yeah, but
of this thing.
I mean, if you think about something like a pie crust or like a baking powder biscuit recipe, like these are things that are based on ratios a lot of the time, so it doesn't make sense to tweak the recipe. Like it won't be as good as the original like rock solid ratio of flour to water to fat that works, and so it's fine to take it. But as with knitting, I think there are social costs if you are someone who, especially if it's a very unique combination of flavors or like a new technique that no one has made famous before, and you're taking it and kind of claiming it as your own, you get really side-eyed in the cooking and recipe writing space.
You know, I like the recipe as just an analogy to kind of think about what pieces can be covered, what pieces can't be covered. You can make something from a recipe and resell it, right? Like you are not forbidden from baking a cake from a recipe. You can then go on and sell that cake. So back to the nitty-gritty of knitting, what can be copyrighted, what cannot, and what actions can or cannot be protected?
Yeah, so knitting similarly has the combination of creative expression and technical instruction. So the parts of the pattern that are considered creative expression are the charts, like your actual charts created by you, the photos you take of the pattern, and the exact wording of the instructions. Again, if your instructions are like K1, P1, you can't copyright that phrase. It's not, there's nothing creative about that. That's just a technical instruction. So those are the things that are covered by copyright. The parts that aren't, methods or quote procedures for doing, making, or building things. So that could be something like magic loop, maybe doing your technique for German short rows, construction techniques. Have you heard of the fish lips kiss heel? It's like a sock heel.
A heel? No.
So it's like a heel construction. You can buy the instructions on Ravelry. They are apparently 16 pages long.
For just the heel. Okay.
For just the heel. There's a whole, it's like a whole method, I guess.
Okay.
And the designer requests that if you use her heel construction method in a pattern, you mention her and link to her pattern. That is not, I don't think, actually enforceable in any way, that you require someone to cite your method when they use their method in their copyright protected work. But that's just kind of one example of how people want to protect a special method, but actually the law does not protect you and does not make it, like you don't own that method. The method is now out and belongs to the world. Similarly, common stitch patterns are in the public domain, like moss stitch or 2x2 rib. And then the interesting thing that feels like it's coming out more recently is the idea that you can't make an article based on a pattern and then sell that article of clothing.
That's the idea, but
yes,
right, because
the designer has come up with the idea for this garment, and so they own that idea, and you can't then physically create that idea and then sell it. But that's actually false for clothing, because clothing under copyright law is considered a useful article, which means that you cannot copyright the underlying design. So all of those warnings that patterns publish are basically, I think, just unenforceable. Although I did see a blog that we'll link to that mentioned that if a seller has a terms and conditions that you agree to when you're
before purchasing the pattern. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that if you kind of check that you agree to that, they might be able to enforce that clause. But on Ravelry, you never agree to terms and conditions. I don't think I own any patterns where I would legally not be allowed to sell whatever garment I made from that pattern.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point that I also had read about, which is part of the issue with this, you are not allowed to sell things you make from this pattern, is that often that information is on the pattern and you have already bought the pattern by the time you see that information. And because that specification is not made explicit before the transaction of buying the pattern, it cannot be an actual condition of the transaction, which is where this terms and agreements thing, that is legally enforceable in a way because you have said before a financial transaction has happened, I agree that this condition is part of this transaction. That's where the enforceability comes in. But if you have bought something and then are told you can't do this, that's not enforceable. There was an interesting case of this a few months ago with Stephen West Knits specifically. There was somebody, I believe, who was trying to destash their finished objects and was going to sell a shawl that they had made from a West Knits pattern and received a message from West Knits saying the West Knits copyright printed at the bottom of each pattern reads, pattern for personal use only. This means that you are allowed to use the pattern for your own personal use only and that all rights to distribution of and income generated from the pattern are reserved to Stephen West, as if that applied to the finished item, not right, which is not the case. What is the case, and this gets us into this next piece, which is the sharing of patterns. Could I take that Stephen West pattern that I bought online and resell it to somebody else? And the answer is no, you can't do that because that is the protected thing that is copyrighted. You cannot resell nor technically even lend someone a digital pattern, whereas you can resell or lend someone a pattern book. And the difference there is that there's this addendum to copyright law called the first sale doctrine that applies to physical items and not digital items that does allow for reselling. That's why used bookstores are not illegal. You are allowed to resell physical books, but it's the same way you can't resell an ebook or lend somebody an ebook. Something I found particularly interesting is that part of the idea behind that is that a physical book with wear and tear is devalued. And so you are not reselling the exact same thing. There is a change in the object itself when it is resold because it is used versus a digital pattern is the exact same thing that you got. It can be reproduced indefinitely and sold and resold in that way, which then makes that not protected by the first sale doctrine.
I just have to think it's also just the rampant money grubbing of any sort of digital media world as well, where it's something new, so they get to write new rules and the rules are written in ways that advantage them. I think that's part of it too, is an understanding from these companies that these items are more easily pirated and shared and they have to protect their profits and maybe get even more profits out of it in the meantime.
So these different realms, right? We have this pattern to pattern idea of intellectual property. We have this pattern to finished item idea of intellectual property. And then we also have the sharing of patterns and, the laws surrounding each of them, or the way that the copyright law applies to each of them being slightly different.
And I'm just wondering, were knitters always so worried about intellectual property? Because I have to think that they weren't. It wasn't always this bad.
Knitting very much starting as an oral and community tradition. So knitting being done together in groups, right? It's why bother writing something down when I have somebody here to explain it to me? And the oral tradition and oral tradition, but also physical tradition, right? The knowledge of the hands, knowing how to do something, learning it and being able to do it again without needing to reference a pattern. There were also, the Victoria and Albert Museum had an interesting little blog post about this, talking about knitting songs. Did you ever learn in through the front door, around the back, peek through the window, and off jumps Jack?
Oh, yeah, that's familiar to me.
Yeah. So, I mean, these little like rhymes and songs, that's just an actual knit stitch. But apparently there were more involved ones that were almost like full patterns. That is a piece of it. Another piece of it is just like literally everything is harder to write down and more expensive, right? Like the idea of I got my little like notes app or my little Sharpie and paper, like, right? For so much of human history, that has not been something that is affordable or accessible. Also, just literacy rates, right? So it's like if I have some sort of, I mean, charts and abbreviations, I think, are in a different category, but any sort of like long written out thing may not be accessible to many people. And in fact, the first English knitting pattern we have, which is from 1655. It's just one long sentence of how to knit a hose, but it's like fully written out sentence, right? And if you can't read that, that is not useful to you.
Just thinking about in the communal nature, the idea that if you've made some sort of improvement in knitting or like innovation, it helps everyone. And to keep it just for yourself, I think would probably feel strange and unnecessary.
Yeah, right, exactly. That it's like everybody can benefit from this, and we're not all just out here for our individual selves like we are now. So why not share that? There's also the fact, so aside from lower literacy rates, there's also just the actual lighting conditions. This was something that was talked about in that book I shouted out a few episodes ago called This Golden Fleece. The author talks a lot about knitting being done by feel, right? Like, especially in these like more northern countries where it's very dark much of the year, electricity is not a thing, lighting conditions are so low that knitting itself is being done by feel, let alone asking me to like be able to read a pattern because we're knitting in the dark, essentially. And another piece of it in that community oral tradition is the way that patterns being linked to place, right? So it's like this community builds this tradition of these certain patterns, of these certain construction styles, that is passed down within the community from person to person rather than in some sort of written form. And a really interesting example of that being this book, physical book. Shout out to Guilds. Got this for free from a Guilds member who was destashing her book collection, which was allowed because of the first sales doctrine. But this is a book, a pretty famous book that Gainsey, Guernsey, Jersey, the style of fisherman's sweater from the British Isles. This book was published in 1955, and it was the first time that many of these patterns were written down. And the book is organized by location because the patterns are so closely tied to very specific communities. You know, why bother writing these things down when they are so ingrained in the culture and in the community? And then, of course, thankfully, somebody did write them down for those of us who are not members of those communities so we could learn about them. So those are all the reasons to not even have a knitting pattern in the first place. But then pattern books did start to become a thing. Publishing in general really took off more in the 1800s, right? Advances in publishing, in paper, in ways of printing, in ability to share printed materials, generally speaking, really took off in the 1800s, and also the same with knitting, which, as we talked about in a previous episode, coincides with the advent or the adaptation of knitting away maybe from professional spaces and more into the hobby domestic space, which again, we're not working together in a guild with a bunch of people. I'm like knitting by myself on my couch at home, like many of us are now. And this also coincided, so printing of books, but also printing of magazines and knitting magazines being a really big thing, starting in the 1800s and through the 1900s. And this is developing the idea of writing down patterns being in print, following patterns. And then even more so as we get closer to our age, the idea of like the designer, right? So for a lot of time, patterns were printed, but they weren't attributed to individual people. But then that started to become more of a thing. And then, of course, getting to the present day, the digital explosion, Ravelry, the idea of like anybody being able to put a pattern out there and or make money off of it being facilitated by the internet. And that brings us to today.
Yeah, and that causes so many complications and potential controversies around copyright because like back in the 70s, you're not going to start your own magazine and then print like an identical copy of somebody else's pattern. Like that just wouldn't make sense. It was too hard to get in the door of actually like printing that pattern and making money off of it. But now it's a completely different space. And
right.
basically anyone could start designing patterns and selling them on Ravelry.
Yeah. So to that end, we thought it would be interesting to look at a few examples. Again, what is legal and what is not legal, what is ethical or socially acceptable, what is not unethical or socially unacceptable. So Anjali, what example would you like to start with?
First, shout out to Size Inclusive Collective, who writes a lot about these copyright issues on their Instagram. And this first example was one that I pulled off of their Instagram, which is the Norma sweater by My Favorite Things Knitwear and the Harbor sweater, a new sweater pattern that's currently in testing from Ozetta. So the Norma was released first. That was released in February 2024. And I do recognize differences between the patterns, although my first impression of them is that they look extremely similar. What's your first impression just looking at the two of them?
I would actually think they're different enough, personally.
Okay, yeah. So the Norma uses fingering and weight and mohair held together, and the Harbor uses, it looks like one strand of worsted. It's a little hard to figure out just because the pattern hasn't been released yet, but this is based on test knitters that are posting about their projects. And the color work is slightly different. Like that middle line in the color work is straight on the Norma and then kind of like offset on the Harbor. So those difference, I mean, even though they both have a pretty wide raglan, the neck is kind of like a higher neck, the general shape is very similar. That's different enough that these are clearly two different patterns. Interestingly, the Norma is inspired by a 1960s pattern. So My Favorite Things Knitwear designed the Norma as part of the Isir Archives collection. And actually I'll link to it below. I was looking through the collection that particular sweater came from, and I was like, oh shoot, like I want all of these. And actually 10 of them are already my favorites. And they were based on the patterns from the 1960s from a designer named Åsa Lund. And we'll put up a picture of the Svenborg, which is what the Norma was based on. And you can see it's quite different. It is definitely like a more inspired by rather than a recreation of. And the Norma has been quite popular on Ravelry. I've been seeing it a lot in the last maybe 6 months on my knitting YouTube channels that I watch. I think it's just become a pretty popular colorwork sweater. It has about 1,900 projects on Ravelry. And so My Favorite Things Knitwear doesn't seem to have commented on this, but it has kind of popped up in the chatter by other knitters who are seeing the Harbor and being like, this is just the Norma. But the designers themselves have not commented on this directly. So is it allowed legally? Yes. Is it allowed socially? My take is that these particular designers often are making designs that are not reinventing the wheel and have a lot of designs that look very similar to each other. So it's not super shocking. I think the Norma does have color work that makes it a little more unique. And so just the closeness of this color work to the existing pattern more just makes me think like, is it needed? Does the world need this pattern that's quite similar to another one that exists? I don't know. What do you think, Allison?
So I think a piece of it for me that's interesting is also just in terms of like the power dynamic. Like I think of Ozetta and My Favorite Things as like commensurate in terms of visibility and popularity. And so is it like a bullying scenario or like a very big thing stealing from a smaller thing? Is that different from, not saying that these are being stolen, but like similarities between something with like a ton of visibility and something with less and the time that things are released versus also just like, this is also a major blind spot for me, fashion trends, right? Like there are aspects of these sweaters, the the key sweater maybe from Petite Knit. There was another design by Jessica M. Knits that I saw recently that had a similar, there are similarities to me among all these things where it's like, is that just a trend right now? Right? This idea of like this, and if something is a trend, is it necessarily that it is stolen from a specific person, or it's like, oh, we all like how this looks right now, I'm going to make something that looks like this. So is it just a popular trend, and is that, is it needed? Maybe not, but I don't know that I'd even call it unethical.
You never know what is going to meet the needs of different knitters, whether it's what yarn you have on hand, the size of needles you want to knit with, to the style of a certain pattern designer's writing. This cardigan is an Ozetta pattern, and I find her pattern writing quite clear and easy to follow, so maybe that's a pattern writer that you prefer. So yeah. Another kind of gray area that I discovered and wanted to talk about was Pink Fizz is a sweater by Andrea Mowry, and it's a basic drop shoulder, split hem, mostly stockinette, and then along the side panels is a very striking lace motif. Well, it turns out this lace motif is from a book called Japanese Knitting Stitch Bible by a designer named Hitomi Shida. Some stitch bibles are collections of older stitches that a designer has collected over time. They didn't necessarily create all of them. Apparently this book in particular, the author says that she created all the lace designs in the book. So there was, I think, a bit of complaining from folks on Ravelry about the fact that the pattern didn't mention that book or give any sort of credit to Hitomi Shida. So I think Andrea Mowry did eventually revise the pattern and list that book as a source of inspiration for the lace in the sweater. But it's definitely something that it feels like a little bit, not a legally gray area, because legally there is no standing because you can't copyright stitch patterns. You can copyright the book of stitch patterns, but not the actual patterns themselves, so other people can freely use them and profit off of them. But it definitely does fall into the what are the social rules around this, and is it just crediting the original creator of the lace pattern? Definitely, it's not only Andrea Mowry who does this. For that particular book, I've heard that Starry Nordland, a lot of her patterns pull from that book. So the question people are asking online is like, is it right for a designer to kind of soak up these accolades of like, oh, you're the queen of lace, like you're so good at this, when that particular lace pattern was not created by that designer? Or do they have maybe like a social obligation to point toward the person who actually did design that lace that is what makes this otherwise very plain pattern interesting? Again,
I think it's a question of visibility for me. Ethically speaking, like this question of like visibility and the power dynamic, right? Like these very popular knitting designers. Also, to be fair, this Japanese knitting stitch Bible, I've also heard of a lot. Like I see that a lot in the ether as well. It's not like some hidden book that nobody knows about, kind of. I think the citation definitely helps and should be there from the beginning. So, making that a piece of your promotional material or the way that you are putting the pattern into the world, to front that as being the source of your pattern.
Legally, a lot of times these violations don't have consequences, cannot be enforced, but the social consequences are also quite interesting because those can be and are enforced, and especially now in the age of social media can get really overwhelming and sometimes out of hand as far as like people being called out or piled on by those that read about the controversy. It's much more common socially for people to bring it to the social court of knitting Instagram and decide who was in the right. And that can have real impacts on people's businesses, and also can just create stress around having to navigate this in a very public space.
Yeah, you had in the notes an interesting example that I was not aware of. Are you able to explain that specific
so
case a little?
There was a recent episode of Made in the Moment that was about this controversy, so we'll link to that in the notes, which is the sailor slippers. Do you remember those striped slippers that were like everywhere in December 2025? Apparently, someone created a crochet version of those and put it up for sale on Etsy, and the creator of the sailor slippers then reported that and had it taken down. And the creator of the crochet pattern then went to the Craft Snark subreddit and was like, I'm so upset. This person had my pattern taken down. It's totally different from hers because it's crochet, like inherently is going to be different from a knitting pattern. This is just really unfair. And basically, it sounds like maybe that the crochet designer went to the court of public opinion before waiting to hear back from the original designer of the sailor slippers to allow them to kind of work it out in private. So it just sounds like a bad mix of misunderstanding, hashing things out in public, perhaps too quickly, and then a lot of people getting deeply invested and kind of piling on to both sides.
But it was successfully the sailor slipper knitted pattern designer was successful in getting the crochet, like Etsy took the pattern
so
off,
Etsy took it down because I mean Etsy is just like a hot mess of a lot of bad actors in the craft space, you know, like AI generated, just literal like stealing patterns and then reselling them, just people
stealing as in word for word, image for image,
as in word for word, probably just taking the PDF. I don't know, I've never bought a stolen pattern, but it sounds like
that is a case that is copyright illegal.
Yes. Yes. There's like so much shady stuff there that Etsy, it sounds like they're pretty aggressive with allowing designers to report things and then have them taken down, and then it's up to the person whose listing was taken down to kind of prove that it's not an identical copy. You can watch the whole drama on the Made in the Moment episode, but it sounds like the sailor slippers were so popular that there were so many like shady, true copyright violations happening on Etsy that this one might have gotten just kind of lumped in with all of those. But it sounds like once they got into conversation, it got worked out and it was fine. It just was maybe taken to the public before it needed to be, and the public was relentless in its response. And then also in that episode it points out that actually the sailor slippers were published right around the same time as this other striped felted slipper, and both designers of those two patterns came forward and said like, we didn't copy neither one of us, like we've talked to each other, neither one of us copied each other, we just had this idea around the same time, which is something that also happens because we're all influenced by the same inputs as far as like what's trendy in fashion, like you were saying earlier, or just like what's out in the ether, what is popular in other patterns. Like our stripes really popular right now. Did a new type of yarn come out that is like unique and people might be interested in working with? There's just so many reasons why designers might have the same inspiration and actually come up with very similar ideas at the same time.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's like the magic of creativity.
So, you know, the idea of legality versus ethics, there are a couple just situations that I thought worth pointing out in terms of where something might not be illegal, but in my mind feels unethical. I'm curious what you think. There have definitely been cases that I've heard of with patterns being, for example, being published for free, and then those patterns being very slightly changed and then and somebody then sells that pattern instead. So a difference of like taking something free that somebody's put out of their goodwill into the world, and then you get to profit off of it with very little difference. That feels a little shady to me. Yeah. And then also the ethics of like power balance, right? So there are definitely cases I've seen too of indie designers being like, Shein, here's this huge commercial entity making this finished object that looks extremely similar to this pattern I, as like a part-time indie designer, made. And is it illegal? No. Is it not great? In my opinion, yes.
Yeah,
and this
Oh, there was a design, I think by Pernille Larson. It's with the flowers on it. So we can put those two photos up. Maybe it was Free People. That
Oh, yes, that was it.
Had like
yes.
an exact replica of that. She can't copyright the flower motif. But it was identical. It was
right. And
identical.
So again, illegal, no. Shady, yes. And to me, that's a power dynamic thing, which is kind of what I was referencing before, where it's like, if we have these two entities that feel like they're in similar spaces of recognition and ability to advocate for themselves, perhaps, or get their own visibility, and there's overlap, that feels less problematic to me than like a super huge power dynamic of like this very small entity that doesn't make a lot of money and this very huge entity that makes a ton of money having that crossover. Because the flip side of that is like, you see all the time indie designers being like, I saw this sweater at Gap and I was going to like make it myself or like make a pattern of it. That like doesn't bother me so much, even though it's kind of the same thing, but the power differential is reverse. And so I'm not as bothered by that ethically. And again, that's just me. Like, I'm curious because it really is a similar situation, but purely by nature of the power differential, I feel differently about each circumstance. What about you?
And you also see these cases where like someone has created a design that involves like a Disney character or something.
Right,
and
right.
Then they get mad because another designer has copied their their design, which involved copyrighted material in the first place. So
that's a whole separate, which I don't know that we can even get into or should, but are you allowed to put Mickey Mouse on a sweater design?
No, you're not.
But how is that protected by copyright?
I think it's like a trademark, maybe like a...
This is why we're not lawyers.
Yes.
Anyone with more knowledge about that who wants to chime in, please do.
So there is some kind of just hypocrisy, I guess, when your sweater is inspired by a sweater designed by another company. Like I see all those, like Cezanne, as I said in the intro, or like Baba, like those designs are very like, make me something that looks just like it. And then another designer puts out something that looks like your thing that you were modeling off of someone else's design. Like there's just something a little hypocritical about that.
Which is all tied into capitalism. Again, another theme of this podcast.
Acknowledging that there really are threats to knitwear designers' businesses from truly bad actors like fake AI patterns or patterns that are just stolen and sold online. So those are real. Or even threats.
Stolen and shared for free, which again is considered a violation of copyright.
Yes, but it does feel like this idea of intellectual property and the taboo on sharing and iterating and innovating together has been impacted by social media. I don't know if it's just the speed at which ideas are shared or this giant size of the audience that they're being shared with. Because I think even if you think back to the days of Ravelry where, you know, Ravelry forums were like the place to gather and talk about knitting, even then, even the biggest forums were fairly small compared to the reach of some of the biggest knitting designers. And I think the more people are in the room, the more that kind of social contract is weakened, where there is less and less of a real community that feels like an obligation and connection to each other. So I feel like that has kind of made people maybe more protective of their ideas and suspicious of the people around them. What do you think?
You can see that too in the way I think that the law has struggled to keep up with the technological development. I appreciate the idea of communal knowledge and oral tradition and like person to person communication, but I also understand the idea behind, I mean, maybe now it's like humans versus machines, where it's like, let's band together as humans and protect ourselves from like a technological stealing of human idea, right? Like the idea of like protecting thinking, which is another with large language models and like use of existing human text, and that being a whole ongoing legal battle right now as well, like that this is protected, that the written materials are protected and they're being used for a purpose that is not legal, is a challenge that's in the courts right now.
And also just thinking about now, it just feels like so much in our country in particular, like it's these huge powerful entities of like these big corporations, and then these little individuals just trying to fight for themselves. Whereas, you know, in the 70s, in the 80s, you're a knitting pattern designer, you have like the protection of the magazines or the publishing companies that you are sharing your work through, and they have lawyers and they have power and they're able to help you navigate. And actually they probably owned your work, but it wasn't just you alone. And just thinking about kind of the sailor slippers issue, I think that's probably part of it, is just feeling really lonely and having to put up all of your own barriers to protect you from outside forces trying to steal this successful pattern. Who knows if you're ever going to have such a successful pattern again, and like maybe this is your one chance to make a living off of the thing that you love doing.
Do we need a designer union?
Maybe.
I mean, like,
You
sort
heard
of
it here
not.
first, folks.
Yeah. I mean, as a member, I'm a member of 2 unions and appreciate the protections I get from them. And obviously they are only possible because of the banding together of a bunch of small individuals in the acting world. I don't know. Would that make a difference?
I don't know. I do appreciate it. Does seem like Ravelry is not like a platform that is trying to squeeze every last dollar out of the designers that are posting and selling their patterns there. So I do appreciate that about our particular space. But I've just been thinking about like, what would it look like to go back to a knitting culture that was more based on sharing and communal bettering, I guess, and is it possible maybe to build that within our own small communities? I was talking to a farmer friend the other day just about how for small farmers, economies are different and more, I guess, old-fashioned, but maybe at some point we'll have to move back towards this type of economy where it's like she will loan equipment to a friend who lives on a neighboring farm, knowing that somehow like that good deed will come back and help her at some point. Like it creates this reciprocity that everybody benefits from. So I don't know, that just feels like maybe like a knitting future that we can hope for.
Yeah. Curious for your thoughts as well in terms of, like, to some degree, ethics is a personal belief system versus laws that we live under and are beholden to in a tangible way. And so curious to hear from you all too about your views on the ethics of the various circumstances we've discussed or ones you may know of that you want to share. So on to our new segment, 2 stitches enter, 1 stitch leaves. Where this time it's Anjali's turn. I'm going to propose some this versus that scenarios, and she has to decide which one will live to see another day.
I'm ready.
Are you ready? Okay. First scenario. Wood or bamboo needles versus metal?
Metal all day.
There you go.
I started on bamboo, but no, I love my Chagu interchangeables. I wouldn't replace them. Although I am taking an international trip this summer, and I have heard although TSA allows metal knitting needles, you don't know about other international security, so I am probably gonna look into maybe getting the bamboo tips for those just for the trip. I
did that a couple summers ago when I traveled internationally. I was a totally metal person. I'm a metal person. But I got bamboo for that trip and like fell in love with them. So I actually I will use both. I still probably default to metal, but I kind of thought I was a metal only person. And then having those bamboo needles for international travel, I was like, wait a minute, I kind of like these.
Yeah. Metal is leaving.
Metal
would have fallen.
Oh yes. Oh right. God, I had to wrap my head around. I was like, wait, leaving's not a good no, but they're the ones surviving to see another day out of bamboo gets left behind. Yeah. Cable needle or no cable needle when doing cables?
Cable needle, because I feel like I'm not experienced enough to do the no needle cables, but I am intrigued. I haven't tried. I've heard a lot about no cable needle, but I haven't tried it yet. So the cable needle is leaving with me.
So for those listeners, viewers who have maybe never done cables or who are not knitters, when you cable, you twist your stitches. And so sometimes to do that, you use like a shorter needle called a cable needle. So you can like put the stitches you're twisting, some of them on another needle. So that when you twist them, they're not like just hanging out in space by themselves. But there's also a way where you can just kind of do it manually and trust that your stitches aren't going to completely fall apart. I think, I think it is a matter of personal preference.
What do you do?
I don't use a cable needle, but I sometimes think my cables are a little wonky, and I wonder if a cable needle would help. So
yeah,
maybe we should try it.
Give it a try. It survived, so
okay,
try it.
It's for another day.
Yeah.
And I guess when the option is a non-entity, it's like a little less sad. This one's tricky because it's like dependent, but I guess this is like a desert island scenario where it's like you can only use one of these for the rest of your life. Okay. Which would you use? Variegated yarn versus solid yarn. Let's lump together both like indie dyed crazy colors, but also like heathers and also like tweed yarns, which are all to various degrees not solid colors. You can still pick solids.
That's a hard one. I don't want any. Well, I would only take the tweeds and the heathers. Can I do that?
Yeah. Okay. But would you choose that over solid?
Yes. Because I think it's just more interesting, and I think it makes the finished, like, I don't really like super variegated hand-dyed yarn. That's just not my style or preference, but I think with heathered or tweedy, which is like colors that have more depth and like, it's not just blue, it's like blue, but there's somehow like some red and some purple mixed in there, things like that. I think it just gives it more interest and then makes it, for me, feels like a more special garment. I mean, this thing I'm wearing right now, the yarn is a mix of cotton and wool, so there's like a built-in variegation.
Is that your mungo?
Yeah, that's the mungo.
Yeah. Anjali, what's making you happy about knitting right now?
So actually, to be honest, like there's not been a lot to be happy about. There's been sadness around my knitting because the weather in Denver, as I've complained about before, has been so hot this winter. I feel like I have not been able to wear a lot of my knits. I'm not like excited. There's things that are
That's the point of living in Colorado.
Yeah, there's just unfit. Like that zipper sweater, I only have one last step and I just haven't done it because I'm like, I can't wear it. It's way too hot. So I haven't been casting on anything new because I'm just like, well, I'm not going to wear that heavy sweater. So what's the point? So I've been like going back, and contrary to popular opinion, I do have whips just sitting there for a while. So I've been going back and like finishing a bunch of them, and it feels great. So on the
Show and tell.
No, not on the Mungo topic. On the Mondim topic, I made a Musselburgh hat. They have like a sort of indigo variegated yarn, and I do actually like this variegation. It's very it just makes it really interesting.
Is it the same? Is it the same yarn the whole way through?
I'm scared to open it because it's gonna be
don't open it.
Weird, but I'll just open it. So if you don't know this hat, you do like a big sort of like pill shape, and then you put it together.
So it's like a double thickness,
beanie. And this is my first time making one, and I am in love. I'll definitely make more of these because it was a great travel project. I cast it on when I went on a trip and have used it a bunch.
Also great for like small quantities you want to use up. I think I started it it was a little fiddly at the top and I didn't love it and I didn't keep going, but I have the pattern and
once you get it established at the top, you're good. I used the crochet pinhole cast on. I finished this cowl, as you can see, not yet woven in the ends, but this was the first color work thing I ever cast on. And I didn't love it because it's not at all like a rhythmic, like you have to be glued.
You have to look at every row. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So it looks really nice on camera, but this is Alpaca Elegance from Green Mountain Spinnery, and it blocked out really nicely. It looks great. It was very scratchy, and now it's like moderately scratchy for wearing around the neck, but
yeah, that's the neck. Yeah,
so, yeah. And so that was an old. I think I cast that on like 2 years ago. So it's been sitting around for a while, and then Lumen. So
it looks so good.
I do have one arm that got slightly cut off because I was missing. You can barely even see it.
Are they different?
This one has like one less row of glue. I ran out with one row to go, so it was totally fine. But I have only been able to wear it twice because of the weather, which is a bummer. And that I definitely now like, I've never really wanted to make a lighter weight sweater because it seems like so much knitting, but now I'm like, I see the appeal. Like I can't wear this giant Aran weight colorwork sweater.
Yes. I have on my wish list, I think I want to do a sport weight cardigan. I haven't
me too.
done sport weight, and as you're wearing something with like a cotton blend. I also
I've been investigating some more cotton blends. I think I'm going to try Durham Natura has the Robinson. I think I might try.
Okay.
So I'll let you know
on the Mondim topic, Mondim, which is Retrosaria Rosa Pomar, not to be confused because I do think La Bien-Aimée has a Mondim, a similar named line. Yeah. But it is technically a sock yarn in that it is spun very tightly, and I know I've talked about this on previous episodes, but I am now absolutely obsessed and think I might never go back to a nylon blend sock. Because I did promise to update everybody on the wear and tear on my 100% wool socks, and they're doing great. The original pair is doing great. I've made another pair since that also doing great. They like have definitely felted on the bottom, but I find that happens even with superwash nylon ones. And so they're felted on the bottom, but the color work and the pattern on the visible part of the sock has very much stayed intact. I haven't worn through any heels yet, and I like wear my socks. I don't treat them particularly carefully, and they're doing great. And the bounce back and just they don't sag, like the nylon, the lack of nylon and the not superwash nature of the yarn means that they just like retain their shape so nicely. And so I might now only knit socks out of Mondim. I don't know that I would be curious to try another 100% wool. As I understand it, Mondim is spun very tightly, which makes it more durable, right? Like this, I don't know that I'm going to go out and just start doing only wool socks out of anything, but I would be curious to also look into other 100% wool sock specific yarns. And
this beanie is just slightly less than one ball, which I think right now is selling for $16 most places, something like that. Okay. It's pretty good for a full beanie.
Yeah, that's great.
Was that you're happy about knitting, or did you have a different?
No, I'm getting them sneaking into. My happy about knitting is, so I started this play that I talked about in the last episode, which I am pleased to report I still do know how to carry boulders underwater. You'll get this if you watch the last episode. And it's been going great. But the first day of rehearsal, we went on our first break, and I look across the table and another actor has pulled out her knitting. Yes. And I was like, ah! I do think I came on, someone I did not know before. I came on a little strong, but I was like, tell me all about this. What are you working on? What is your knitting life? And so it's just fun, to find another knitter in the wild. Yeah. It was just nice. And we talk about knitting now. And I think by the time this comes out, she will have received them already. She's not going to watch this podcast, but it's her birthday on opening night. And she doesn't knit socks. And I was like, I'm going to knit her a fun little pair of socks because she will appreciate it. And I didn't talk about this before, but it's worth, I once was knitting in a lift home from like the train station, and the lift driver was like, "You're knitting?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he was like, "I am from Ethiopia, and there's this whole knitting culture there," and like was so excited to talk to me about. And he didn't knit, but his like, my mom knit, and I once had somebody come up to me and be like, "My grandma," like just, it's fun to see another knitter in the wild. It's also fun just to like it's a way to interact with people that is just a fun thing to do. And it's like, of course I love like being in a knitting circle or going to a fiber festival and seeing other knitters, but like catching other knitters in the wild, or just people who like want to talk about knitting in the wild, is like an extra little fun spot for me. So that was nice.
Well, how about non-knitting? What are you yelling about that, wait, I forgot, 2 women yelling about something other than knitting?
I believe that's what we call it, yes. My husband is turning 50 this year, and he has never been to Mexico City, and he's always wanted to go to Mexico City. And so we are going to Mexico City as a family. It's also our first, with the kids, yes. And it is our first international trip as a whole family. And my daughter takes Spanish at school. My husband is like, "No, I don't speak Spanish," but he does speak Spanish better than you'd think. So that'll be fun. I was going to make it a surprise, but he loves planning trips and he's really good at it. And I was like, part of the joy of something like this is the anticipation. And so I would rob him of that if I made it a surprise. So I have told him about it, and he's planning everything. But so I don't know, it's just something to look forward to. And also just because I was like, oh, maybe people will have recommendations. So if you have been to Mexico City, especially if there's something like textile related, that you want to let me know about, I would love to hear.
Love it. I can't wait to hear about it.
How about you, Anjali?
So I signed up for a class at Denver Art Museum that happened at the end of last month, and it was awesome. So I don't know, I actually was like looking at these classes while I was staying with you, because I think when we went to the State Fair exhibit, I was just like, oh, I want to do something. I want to like take a class and like learn some new skills. So I found this class that is about like creating your own personal tapestry based on the art of this like feminist kind of late 90s British punk woman named Tracy Emin, who like one of her most famous works was something called Everyone I've Ever Slept With. And it was a tent, like just a camping tent, and she had appliqued in fabric all the names of everyone she had ever shared a bed with, meaning also like her mother, her brother. The first day we went around the museum and looked at some of the textile-based and also like typographical artwork in the museum. And if you've never been to Denver Art Museum, it's a great museum. I love it. And then we sort of took time. We could go anywhere in the museum that we wanted to, and just sit and plan out what we wanted to do. And then the instructor brought in scraps of fabric that she had collected over the years, and so we could just kind of like shop all the like different fabrics that we wanted. And then the second week, basically the whole 4-hour time was just spent constructing our tapestries. And we were encouraged to be vulnerable and kind of like open up about ourselves. So I did not finish mine. It was actually great for me, like a great experience for me, because I'm very perfectionistic. I like to like do things like really well, like to a level of excellence that I agree with. And in this class, I was like, well, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, this is the first time I'm ever doing anything. We did not sew. It was all using fabric glue.
Oh, okay. I was wondering the construction. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So because the teacher had created a couple of her own tapestries, and that's the technique that she used. So I just kind of allowed myself to be like, whatever, like I'm just going to try this and see how it comes out. So I don't actually even really like what I came up with. Like as I started to put it together, I was like, I'm just feeling like this is kind of I'm not very inspired by this. So I don't think I'm going to finish that. I might go back and do more tapestries at some point, because I was really inspired by some of the other works that the other students were doing. And I'll just say in particular, there was one that was really cool that everyone was like, this is amazing, I love this, where this person in the class took a t-shirt, I think that belonged to their partner, and then had, it was almost like a poem around it that was just like sentences about, like they were just like in love with this person's stink, basically. And then there was this like crumply, like worn t-shirt in the middle. And it was just a really cool, like love poem to this person in their life through textiles that felt really like sensory, not only in, you know, touch and like sight, but also like thinking about smells. I couldn't smell the t-shirt, but like just creating all these different experiences. So that was a really cool one. So it was great. The class was paid for by my work because we had this fund that we could use for personal or professional development, and I was like, I want to do something really fun and fortifying after this really hard year of work. So I don't know if I'll do something like it again because it's pretty pricey, but if the opportunity comes up, I would.
Nice.
Well, this was a good conversation, a little less spicy than some of the previous ones.
Or who knows, we'll see what people have to say about our ethical viewpoints.
Yes.
But yes.
What do you think about copyright, all these like copyright dust-ups in the knitting space? What are your kind of ethical or social considerations around designers releasing patterns that are similar to other designers or incorporating things from Stitch Bibles that were designed by somebody else? Like, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, let us know. Thanks for watching.
Like the episode, subscribe to the channel, and hype us even though we don't know exactly what that means.
Hype, raise the roof. That's my opinion.
Yeah. And we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.
I'm grounded and I get my way. I'm proud and I'm howling around. What can I say?